In this video, we'll learn what dependency injection is and why we need it in every app we build for the benefits it comes with. And we'll see how to apply it with Koin, which is a dependency injection library. So let's first understand dependency injection. In general, dependency injection means giving a class the instance variables it needs. So what is this? Let's say we have a view model, which is something we would have in every app. We would have a bunch of view models in an app. So we have this view model. This view model is of a screen that when we click on a button in that screen, we load some data, some string, for example, an ID or so. And this data exists in a database. And to access that database, we have a repository, which is another class. So what this is, our view model needs an instance of that repository to call the function load data, and then that repository will return the data from the database, and then the view model has the data to display it or do whatever we want with it. So our view model needs the repository, and the repository needs the database. So what this is that our view model depends on this repository, and this is the dependency, which is the repository, since our view model depends on it. So we need to inject an instance of this repository or pass it to the view model via the constructor. And the same with the database. The database is a dependency that our repository depends on. So we need to inject an instance of this database to our repository with the constructor. So this is dependency injection. We want to pass those instance variables to those classes that need them. And the usual example we have is that we have a data source, a repository that accesses that data source, and then a view model that needs an instance of that repository to get the data that the data source provides. But you would also think, why do we need then Koin? We can do this by ourselves. We always do this anyway. Koin comes with major benefits, such as it simplifies this process. For example, if you want to create an instance of a view model, of course, a view model is a dependency that our screen relies on or depends on because the screen is the data and the screen can only get the data from the view model, so it depends on it. And then to create this view model, we need a view model factory, which is so much boilerplate code that we don't want to write. Koin does that for us. And then if we want to create a single instance of a repository, for example, that we want to use in a bunch of view models, we can do that with Koin. Or also if we want to scope this repository to a certain lifecycle, like our activities lifecycle. So when our activities is destroyed, then also the instance of the repository that we created needs to also be destroyed. And also in testing, so for example, in production, we want to have the real repository that accesses the real database, but then in testing, we want to have a fake repository that accesses maybe a fake database. So with Koin, we can easily swipe these dependencies for the sake of testing because we don't want to use a real database in testing. So now let's see this in code. Okay, now I have this project in which I have some dependencies first, and let's see them. We have Koin dependencies and retrofit dependencies. I will leave the link to it in the description so you can just copy them. I have retrofit to demonstrate to you the data source that we want to get data from and just how the typical process of an app actually works. Okay, so libraries we need are for Koin and then for retrofit with their versions, which are Koin and retrofit and OK HTTP JSON converter or converter JSON, and then the bundles, which are just those dependencies, Koin and retrofit. And yes, now I access my bundles right here. Just paste these. Maybe I'm also using Java 17 if that's something you need. The latest Kotlin compiler extension version, and sync your project, and now you're good to go with me. Okay, in my project, let's see what I have. I first of all have this app class. That is just an application, and I did register that here in my manifest. Okay, so that's something I have, and then let's see what I also have. I have the core package and feature package. Core package in a clean architecture app is just the package in which we have things that are shared between other features. So let's say navigation. A bunch of features need to navigate between all the screens, and so we have that inside core. Maybe if we have a main view model, we would have that inside here. In this case, we have the main activity and the main view model. In the main activity, I pretty much have nothing. I just call this feature screen, which is something we'll see. And then I have the main view model. This is just a view model, and I don't have anything inside it. And then I have the feature, in which we have the typical clean architecture packages, data, domain, presentation. In the presentation, I have a feature screen that is empty. We won't have any UI anyway. And then we have the feature view model. which is like this, that gets the data, which is a string, and so far we don't return anything. And then we have the domain, which is something we will get back to later. We'll see why we actually need it in this project. We have the data in which we have our repository implementation that implements this repository, which is the interface we have in our domain, which is just an interface that is get data, but we won't use it for now. And then we have some API, and simply this API has not a function, but a retrofit API that has a function get data with some example base URL. We of course won't make any real API calls. When we say get data, we just return data like this. We just assume that we get it from the API. Okay, that's the thing. Now, what we want is in our screen here to display the data that we want to get. So to get it, we need to access the view model from our screen. And our screen needs an instance of that repository, which is this repository implementation here. And that is just coming right here, writing something like private var my repository. For example, implementation is going to be a repository implementation like this. It needs an instance of my API. Maybe I could also create an instance of my API here and then pass it to this repository. But the problem of doing it like this is that any instance we create of this feature view model will be forced to have this repository implementation, which accesses which needs our real API, which is in testing, for example, when we want to unit test our view model, we don't want to have a real API. Let's say the API is not free, and with every request we make, we need to pay. And then in testing, we want to call this function a bunch of times to test everything is working fine. With every test we create, we need to pay. That's not something. We want to create some fake API and some fake repository. But since our view model is forced to have this, any instance we create will have to have this repository, which is something we don't want. Or if we want to have some different repository for some different purpose, that's also something we don't want. So what we do is simply we pass that from the constructor right here. Now we need to provide a type, and you may say the type is going to be my repository implementation. That is correct, technically, but then it's the same problem. Every view model we create needs an instance of this repository implementation, which needs the real API. In testing, this is not something we want. So what we do instead, we create an instance of our just repository like this. Now we can delete that of our repository, which is just an interface. And then whenever we create an instance of this view model, we pass an implementation. We could have any implementation. Now we have this repository implementation. We could just create another implementation that is, for example, fake repository implementation that doesn't need a database or the API and just returns fake data. This is for testing. We just have a fake repository. Now you see why we need this interface and why we need to pass it from the constructor. So we could be flexible when we create more instances of this view model. So now our view model needs this one, which is the dependency. So we inject it to it, and we'll do that when we create an instance of our view model. And normally in Android, to create a view model, we need a view model factory, which is really painful, a lot of boilerplate code that we don't want. So what we will do is we will ask Koin to create an instance of this view model, and then we'll also ask Koin to create an instance of this repository. Depends on the purpose. In production, we want to have the real implementation. In testing, we will have a test implementation, and then simply Koin will figure out what to pass to this view model. When we are in a test environment like here, or in Android test, it will pass the test implementation. If we are in a production environment, which is right here, it will pass the real implementation. So let's do that. To do that, you just close all the packages, open the feature, and then we will create another package right here called DI, which stands for dependency injection. We will have a module inside it. A module is where we provide those dependencies we need, which are the view model, the database, the repository, shared preferences, the retrofit API as we need in this project. So all of those will be provided inside this module. That is going to be, in this case, it's actually for our feature module like this. And that is going to be just a file actually. And then we can say var feature. Of course, feature stands for the name of the feature. So like this, it's import module. If this is authentication, that is going to be authentication module. If this is like details or item details, for example, this is going to be details module, and so on. Now, we want to provide, what do we need in here? We need our API, since we need that in our repository. And then we need our repository, since we need that in our view model. And then we need our view model, since we need that in our screen. So we need to provide the API, the repository, the view model. Okay, let's do that. The first thing is our API. And this is just a retrofit API. So we're going to write single, which means we'll create a single instance of our retrofit API. And whenever we need that API, so let's say we create another repository for a different purpose, and that repository as well needs that API, we'll pass the same instance that we pass in here with single. We also have factory like this, which means creates a new instance of this API every time we need it. In this case, let's just go with single. Okay, let's just create first some space down here, and that is going to be retrofit dot builder dot add JSON factory or converter factory. That is going to be JSON factory dot create, and then the base URL, that is going to be my some API dot base URL dot build dot maybe right here dot create, and that is going to be my some API Apple Common class to Java. Now I just created an instance of my retrofit, and that means whenever I need this retrofit instance, Koin will search, does it have that? It will find it right here, and then it will inject it to the classes that need it. Now, what we need is our API, which is this one. For that, let's also create a single, for example. That is going to be my repository implementation like this that needs what? Some API. And how do we now pass it to it? By just writing git like this. That's it. Now this git will find out that this repository needs some API, and Koin will search, does it have an instance of this some API? And it will find it right here. As you can see, it exists right here. So it will take this instance, passes it to my repository, and then I have my repository with the instance it needs. But this means now that I'm providing a repository implementation. But if we check our view model, we don't need a repository implementation. We need only repository, and that is correct. Repository implementation does implement this repository, but in the end, we want an instance of this one, which means we need to bind this to the thing we need it for, which means we just want to add repository right here, like this. So we'll tell in Koin that we need an instance of our repository, but this is the implementation, since that's an interface. Okay, like this. We could also write this in a different way, like for example, single of like this, and then write our repository implementation double common at first, and then dot bind right here we'll write our repository. So these two are the same thing. You can just write whatever you want. You just go with this one, which is like clear here, I guess, but it's the same thing actually. Now we have our repository. The next thing we need is our view model, and as simple as that, we can just write view model like this, and then we need our feature view model like this that needs what? Needs our repository right here that we have right here. So we can just write again git. So Koin will find that dependency this view model needs is a repository, and it is right here, so it will just pass it. Okay, and that's it. We have our API, we have our repository, and our view model. So the next thing we need is we want to go to our application and then start Koin, because now this module is really not used and we need to use it. So right here, we can just write start Koin like this. The first thing we need is Android application. Why? Sometimes we need to provide room database that needs context, or sometimes we need to provide shared preferences that needs context. So for things that need context, we need to tell Koin how that context looks like. So that is going to be Android context like this, and that is this app like this, okay? This add app. So whenever now we need context, whenever Koin needs context, it will get it right from here. The next thing is we want to add our module. Of course, we can have a bunch of modules. Now we have the future module, but we'll also create an extra module later. And that is, for this case, our feature module. Now we make use of our module. We can probably delete these, or let's just skip them since we need them in here. Now we have our module, and we can just get our data, return repository implementation dot get data. Actually, this one is repository like this. And now to use our view model, we want to go to our screen and create an instance of that view model right here. So it's going to be something like view model is going to be my future view model, but it is actually a Koin view model. So this Koin view model will give me an instance of this future view model that it can get right from here. And this instance needs repository that it can get right from here. This repository needs the API that it can get right from here. Okay, so now let's see if we actually do print the data, which is this data right here. And we are assuming that we are getting from our API, okay? Even though we don't, but we just assume. Here, to print the data, we can just use, for example, launched effect. And the key could be something like true or unit, because we want to execute this once. We can write println we got, and that is view model dot get data. Okay, let's just see if I have any errors somewhere. No, I have no error. I can run the app. I just want to copy this we got and then run the app, and we'll keep an eye on our logcat. Like this, we just want to search for we got to see if we do print data, which is in this case data, this one. The app is running, and let me just bring this right here. We got data. Great. Now our dependency injection works just great. When testing, if we want to create an extra or a new instance of this feature view model, we can just create it normally, pass a fake instance of our repository, fake implementation, rather say, right here. And let me just now close everything and see if I want now to create an extra module. If I want to have more than just one module, of course, in an app, we would definitely have more than just one module. We come here again, we create a DI package, which is dependency injection. And since we are in core, this is going to be a core module, okay? That is val core module. That is a module like this. In the core module, we usually want to have those dependencies that we need across different features. This API, in this case, is only needed in this feature. So we provide it right here. If, let's say, this instance of this retrofit API is needed in different features, then we want to take it from here and provide it right here. If it is needed in different features, they said. But in this case, it's not. It's only needed right here, so we provide it right here. But something we'll usually need in a lot of features, which is shared preferences. That's going to be just single. And now we want to access the underweight context that we created right here, which is this one. So underweight context, like this, let's get shared preferences. We want to give it a name, something like prefs, something anyway. And then context dot mode private. Now we have shared preferences, and whenever we need these shared preferences, how is this going to be? That is, let's just say now we'll create a new package here called data, and which will create an extra implementation. Even though since now we will need this repository in different features or different features, we would want to have this right here. But now for just demonstrating, let's say we have another implementation like implementation 2, just the second implementation. Now we don't need the API. What we need here is shared preferences. It's going to be prefs, shared preferences like this. And then we now use our preferences to get the data. And let's say this is data 2. Now I create an extra implementation, which is something actually good. Let's see if we now have 2 different implementations of our repository, how to provide the implementation we need for the class that needs that. Now we want to go to our core module to provide our second implementation right here. And that is going to be, again, single like this, or just single. And here we need our repository like this. And that is our repository implementation now 2, which needs, again, get, since it needs shared preferences that we will get right from here. But the problem is, just now understand what problem we have exactly right here. Or let's not. Let's see what error we'll get before actually trying to understand the problem. Now we have this other view model, which is the main view model. Let's now provide that as well. So view model like this is going to be my main view model, and just import that. Git. Here we don't actually pass anything. In fact, we need now a private var repository again, and then just do the same as our screen. We want to do view model scope dot launch, and then println, just like this. We got repository dot get data. But for this view model, we want the second implementation, which is this one. But you will see a little problem right now, and I don't know why Android Studio is refusing to close these two files. There is some bug or something. I will run the app, but now what I expect is that in this main view model, I will have the second implementation, and then in what is that? In the other view model right here, in the future view model, I will have the first implementation, since that's exactly what I want. But we will see that we have a problem. Let's make sure that we clear our logcat, and let's also go to our main view model and do a little thing, which is let's say we got 2 to make sure that this is the second one. And then in the second implementation, we want to say data 2. Yeah, that's already fine. Run the app and see what will happen, and keep an eye on the emulator right here. Okay, the app is running, and dump me, I did not create an instance of that view model. Okay, let's go to our main activity and let's create it right here. So that's going to be something like right here, for example. We'll just create it up here. View model is going to be by view model like this, and it is my Koin view model. Now we want to use this view model right here, but I don't think I have any function. Yes, I don't, which means, so this is just how we create our view model right here, and we use by to actually create this instance of this view model whenever we need it. When we actually want to use it, something like a view model.get something, we will initialize this view model using by, which is just initializing it when we actually need it. And you could also just write is equal, which will initialize it immediately. But now what I'm going to do is just create a normal instance right here. So var view model is going to be an instance of my main view model, and that is a Koin view model. And Koin view model, of course, that is in compose. As you can see, we can use that in compose, and this one if we are not in compose context. Okay, now let's actually run the app, and since we have this in the init block, we should immediately print something, hopefully, or the app will crash. And what just happened, and yes, the app crashed. And the reason why, you just understand it logically, what's going on here. And I don't know why Android Studio is not closing these files, but anyway, here in our feature view model, we need this repository. And in our view model, we also need that. In this feature module, we provide it as the implementation. And then in the core module, we provide it as the second implementation. But now we have 2 implementations, and Koin doesn't know which implementation to pass to which view model. This is the problem. And even if we have just one view model, Koin wouldn't know which implementation from the 2 should be passed to the view model, because we need now to make these 2 implementations unique and tell Koin that this view model needs the first implementation, this other view model needs the second implementation, and so on. So we need to identify these view models somehow, okay? And if you want to learn more about this clean architecture thing and how to apply it in big apps, then check my premium course in the description, in which you will build an industry-level app with clean architecture, databases, dependency injection, and all those stuff also at Ktor backend. You can find the link in the description. So what we'll do is that we need to tell Koin that this view model needs the second implementation, and that is by giving this implementation a qualifier. So right here, we're going to write qualifier is going to be named, and the name is going to be, let's say, repository implementation 2. And then we can just copy this, come back here to the other module, again, give it a qualifier, which is now the first implementation. And right here now, we want to also tell that this one is actually named, and this is the implementation we want, which is the second one. And we can just maybe bring this to a new line, that this is our view model. We need to pass an instance of our repository by just giving a get, but which one? Is it the implementation or the second implementation? No, the implementation, since now we identify it with this name, which is repository implementation. In the core module, we can just also copy this, come right here, and then paste it like this. But now we want the second implementation. Okay, and so now we are giving this one the second implementation, this other one the first implementation. We should now print in our main view model we got 2, and then we should print data 2, and then for the first one data like this, or data 1, let us say. Okay, let's write data 1. Now let's go to our logcat and run the app again. See if everything is right. If not, we'll fix any issue that we'd have, and we have an issue. Let's see why. And the reason why the app crashed is that if we go to our core view or core module, let us say, it's actually not used. And I always forget to actually use it right here. So let's put it as the first one. So core module, that's the problem. Let's now check our logcat and search for we got. And as you can see, we got 2, data 2, we got data 1. And we got 2 is in our main view model, which is this one. We got 2, and since we wanted the second implementation, that's what we got. And then in the other view model, here we wanted the first implementation, and then we got, this could be we got 1, that we got the data 1, okay, as you can see in logcat, and everything is working just fine. And as I said, when testing, we want to, if you want to test our view model, then we just want to give it a test implementation, just like we created this second implementation. We want to create a test implementation. If we want to create a fake database, a fake implementation of anything, we can do that with Koin. Also, as I said, if we want to create a new instance of our repository, for example, or our retrofit interface, every time we need it, then we can use factory like this, which means create a new instance for every class that needs it. Another cool thing that Koin comes with is scoping our dependencies to a certain lifecycle. So let's say we want our retrofit API to only exist as long as our activity exists. So we want to scope it to the lifecycle of that activity. Whenever the activity is destroyed, the instance of that retrofit API also needs to be destroyed. We can do that, but I'm not going to actually show you how to do that, since that's a little bit different of a topic. It's not quite different, but of course you can just Google it if you want it. It's pretty much easy, but now I just give you the base of how to use Koin, how to provide dependencies, how to inject them with view models, repositories, screens, whatever you want it with. And in the next video, I will show you how to test with Koin. I already have a testing playlist, but in that one I use Dagger, which is another dependency injection library. And believe me, Dagger and Koin, they do the same thing. It's just the syntax is different. There's really no difference, except that Koin injects those dependencies in runtime, but Dagger, I'm sorry, injects them in compile time. So when we compile our app, Dagger already knows which dependency goes where, but with Koin at runtime when we are using our app. In the next video, we'll learn how to test with Koin. And if you want to become an industry level Android developer, check out my premium course in which you will build an industry level app, a Ktor backend, and all of that using clean architecture, Jetpack Compose, databases, APIs, and a lot of stuff that you would need in the industry. Also leave a like and subscribe to support this channel. See you in the next video. Bye.